Butter Week. I love Butter Week. Okay, I do have a note for the next 2 weeks. Butter Week and Honey Week, all right? My vegan families, I know you might be going, this doesn't sound like it'll work for us, all right? But we do have lots of adaptations. We didn't forget you. So while the stories, of course, are talking about butter and honey in the garden, all of our recipes are adapted. Jessica Diamond went to great lengths to make sure that you could still enjoy both of these weeks happily within your family. So we have a vegan butter recipe that you can swap for making butter and a vegan honey recipe. So don't worry, these are still well adapted for all families. But the stories are really sweet and just celebrating the abundance of the garden in Wondergarten. All right, so Butter Week is a lot of fun. One of my favorites, one of the kids' favorites. All right, so our story is Butter and Biscuits. This is a really sweet, simple story of just learning how things are made in the garden. So of course we have all of these beautiful ranges of stories, and this one is just it kind of almost reminds me of Little House, where you're just learning how things are made. And so Hamilton is just learning what comes from milk and what you can make from milk because it's all still kind of new to him. And Thumbkin just gets to teach him how to make butter with this lovely little Golden Mound song, and it's just an instructional song of how butter is made. And again, it's a simple one, but it is just a sweet instructional story, and then they get to enjoy biscuits and butter, biscuits, and honey, and it's just delicious. So only one song this week, our Golden Mound song, and it is lovely to sing as you're making butter, okay? Morning activity, day 1, our modeling, we're gonna make butter Play-Doh. So this is our kind of base Play-Doh recipe, not with cinnamon and clove, and then just do a few drops of yellow to make that nice, light, buttery yellow, and it really looks like butter. It makes me wanna eat it, but it is really just soft and buttery and just beautiful. Gluten-free version for all of your gluten-free families. And then Living Arts main lesson, day 1, is churning butter. Okay, now I have a ton of tips for success for this, depending on how big your group is and how much prep you want to do and what you want this to look like, okay? So let's get ready. So butter making is a process, and expecting like a 3-year-old to start with heavy cream and fully churn their own butter to finished butter is probably a little bit impractical. So plan for arms getting tired, plan for all of those things. And what I like to do is preparing different stations so that they can experience each part of the butter making process if the whole start to finish process feels too long, especially for a group. So what I did when we did with our group, I had heavy cream with a jar that they could pour and begin to shake. I had like a whipped cream stage where it was kind of half churned, and then I had finished butter ready to wash, and then I had washed butter ready to pat. So all the children could join and experience each of those steps and enjoy each part of the process without having to sit there for 15, 20 minutes to make it successful, because we really want them to see the end product and to see all the steps, and it can be a lot. Now, if you have slightly older children, you could also absolutely say, we are making butter today, we are, switching off, your turn, my turn. And there's 2 ways to do this. You can use, like pictured here, one of those kind of crank butter churns, and these are really fun. Or you can just use a simple mason jar and just shake it. And honestly, those work surprisingly well. And you could just take turns shaking it until you really hear it kind of clunk, and then you pour it and then go on from there. So to make butter from start to finish, you're gonna take room temperature heavy cream. Room temperature is very important. Room temperature heavy cream, if you want, you can add some salt to make salted butter, which I always like doing because I just think it's tastier. Then you're going to choose either method of shaking or churning and just begin. And you're going to shake and churn and churn and shake. You'll get to a whipped cream phase until it's nice and fluffy, and then you can just keep going. And I have a question in the chat box that I want to say yes to. Has anyone used a KitchenAid for butter making? Yes. If you also want to do a less hands-on version, you can absolutely pour room temperature heavy cream into a KitchenAid and just turn it on, and it will absolutely make butter for you. So if you are planning to do this in different stations, that's what I did. I turned on my KitchenAid and I was like, okay, here's my finished butter for them to wash. Here's this. So it does help in the preparation process. Or you can have your kids come on and just watch it and then rinse it out together as well. So that is a very nice and easy way if you need a break from the shaking or the churning, all right? So you shake and you churn until it breaks into buttermilk and butter. Then you're going to pour it out into a strainer and wash out all of that buttermilk. You really want to make sure the buttermilk is all out of there so it doesn't spoil. So washing and squishing and kneading, and then take your butter paddles and pat into a nice little block and wrap it in parchment paper, and you have just made butter. Now be sure to save that buttermilk because you can use it in your biscuit recipe if you would like. We have 2 options there for buttermilk, but it is really, really fun for children to see how cream goes into butter. So as I mentioned, if you have lots of children or if you have a group, it might be advantageous to prepare different butter stations. But if it's just you and your 2 kids, you could probably also just pour it into a jar, take turns shaking and see what happens. So that is up to you. All right, I have so many questions here. I'm going to see, some of these are a little off topic. So besides the tetherball pole, I used ribbons for the tetherball pole. I will link those as well. And then I have some other questions that I'm going to let you all keep chatting about while I focus on making sure you're all well prepared for your May curriculum, all right? So any questions for butter making and butter prep? Now, if you are a vegan family, we have the vegan butter recipe. So instead of churning butter, you would just be making that vegan butter recipe, all right? So that is there for you, for any families who need that, okay? Any butter making related questions before I move on? Yes, no, maybe so. I think not. All right, we'll head on. So now, Butter Week can align and kind of end with US Mother's Day. So that could be, and you'll have to look at your calendar where you want that to line up. But here in May week 2, we do have a prompt to make some Mother's Day cards and gifts. So if you would like to use this opportunity, because at the end, we have you kind of creating this little biscuit box for mothers or as a gift. So if you want to make a card here, you can, because after this week in the calendar, it usually aligns with the next Sunday being Mother's Day, here in the US at least. So if you want to do that, you can. A little note about what you might see here. Back originally when we did this, the way the calendar lined up, we did honey week before butter week and added our honey into the end of our butter week with our biscuit gifts. So if you want to look ahead and maybe think about adding the honey with it, you could do a little swip swap. It depends on where you want each week to align, okay? So just a little planning note, but this prompt is pretty open. You can make little Mother's Day cards, or if that's not what you're doing, you could make a little just gift card or whatever you'd like to do this morning. It's kind of a free open morning depending on what you would like to do with it. And then of course for baking day, we are making biscuits. Now these are traditional Southern American style biscuits. Now I know I have many UK friends here, which might look upon these and say, oh, that looks like a scone. But I assure you, a scone, a British scone and an American biscuit are 2 different things. So I've been to London and I lived in the South, so I can vouch for these 2 things. They are both lovely and I adore them both, but they are very different. A British style scone is going to be more crumbly and sweet, where this is very much a flaky, buttery biscuit. So I would highly recommend trying these things because these biscuits are like a very true classic Southern recipe, and they're flaky and delicious. I even have the UK note here in the book because I remember posting this and people saying, that's a scone. Well, not quite, all right? So highly recommend trying this. Now, if you are in the South of America, I would highly recommend grabbing white lily flour. They're white lily all-purpose flour, not the self-rising flour. This is how you're gonna get the fluffiest biscuits, because in the South they use a softer wheat, where up north here in the Pacific Northwest, we tend to get kind of harder biscuits because we use a hard red wheat, and it just has a higher gluten content. So if you can get a hold of white lily, it is a soft, fluffy flour. It makes the best biscuits. But if not, you can use any all-purpose flour, and you can also take like 2 tablespoons of the flour out and replace it with cornstarch, and it will also help produce really fluffy biscuits, okay? So biscuit making is done with care. So I have my favorite biscuit recipe here. You have 2 different full portion and child's portion. The child's portion will still make like 4 to 6 biscuits because to be able to roll them out and cut, you still need enough dough to work with. Keep your flour, keep your butter and buttermilk nice and cold. You're gonna use a similar technique as pie crust or scones, cutting in the butter and then kind of doing this laminating where you're gonna kind of push. You don't wanna overwork the dough with the biscuits because if you knead it and if that butter becomes really melty, you will get a hockey puck. And we don't want hockey puck biscuits. We want fluffy, nice, lovely biscuits. Now, buttermilk here, you can do 2 different ways. You can actually use the buttermilk from your butter making to make these biscuits, or the traditional recipe is more for like a thick cultured buttermilk. So if you were to go to the store and get buttermilk, it's gonna be cultured and thick and kind of have a tang to it. I've made them with both and both turn out beautifully and lovely. Of course, they're gonna have teeny different flavor profiles, but they're both delicious. So decide if you would like to use either or buttermilk. Obviously, if you've just made butter, you can kind of guarantee that you'll have that buttermilk, where sometimes finding that thick cultured buttermilk in some areas is harder to find. So that is our biscuit recipe. You can also decide to use the butter that you made and the buttermilk that you made. And then once they're done, you can use the butter that you made on the butter biscuits and they're really yummy. So use what you have and they're really, really yummy. So another note with biscuits, use a nice sharp cutter because if you go then you want that nice cut on the sides and that's gonna be what helps them really rise up and it makes a really nice tall biscuit. If you use like a cup or something that's dull, it kind of smooshes the edges together and keeps them short, and you don't want that. And then once they come out, brush with butter. They're so, so yummy, all right? And then you can enjoy with butter and honey or jam or whatever, or gravy, all of that. So biscuit making. And then our day 3 morning activity, we're making our little Mother's Day bundles. So you can add a few biscuits, maybe a jar of honey, your homemade butter. This can be a great little gift for maybe a grandma or someone you love or another mother you love. So, or it just could be a just because gift as well. It's just kind of a nice springy gift box. Pie boxes work really well because they have that little clear window. And then for our final painting activity for painting day, we're just gonna paint with yellow. And if you want it to kind of be, you can also paint with whatever colors you want, but this is just yellow, buttery yellow, and just let them really just enjoy that color. We'll be doing a similar painting day for Honey Week, but there's a few different variations that make them distinct. But for this, you can just use pure yellow right out of the jar and just let them enjoy buttery, sunshiny yellow, right? Yeah, biscuits and gravy. I have some people in the chat saying biscuits and gravy. I would recommend that.